Sultan is back with us, and so is Jeffrey Ringel. He's a former FBI agent. They're joining us now to talk about all the big news of the week. We're doing the show a little bit in reverse order than we have in the past, but we'll have plenty of time now to let the conversation get lively. Jeffrey Ringel, he's a 21-year-old vet. The 21-year-old. I wish.
21-year-old, yeah, that would be nice.
Card that man.
21-year veteran of the FBI, and he's now the director of the Sultan group. Sultan, did I say that right? Sultan group. And of course, Sultan is back with us. He's a counterterrorism analyst, and you were a Trump campaign advisor and surrogate. Welcome, both of you, for being here. Big week this week for a number of reasons. Obviously, there continues to be news in this Russia investigation, collusion, accusations, I guess, are being thrown around between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. And also the Trump campaign and the Trump administration has, in a way, been able to avoid that a little bit because they've been out of the country some. But we've had news this week drop that allegedly Jared Kushner is a focus of the investigation for possible contacts with Russia. What kind of contacts could Jared Kushner have had with Russia that we should be concerned about, Jeffrey?
Well, I just want to say, from an investigative point of view, this is not unusual. The first investigation was into General Flynn, and so anybody who was associated with General Flynn, of course, is going to be talked to. And Kushner probably had relations with General Flynn, and as part of an investigation, you're going to go out and talk to anybody who may have been at the meetings or may have talked to General Flynn. So, I mean, just the fact that they're talking to him, and it's been pointed out that he's not the subject of the investigation, but that the FBI is now going to focus on him. That's not unusual.
So they will eventually focus on other people, is what you're...
They should talk to everybody and anybody who's had contact with General Flynn or were at the meetings or may have been part of any meetings where things were discussed. That's part of the investigation. You want to talk to everybody who could be a witness, who can provide information to support the investigation. Some people will be continue to be investigated because they may be something worth investigating, and other people are just going to be washed out.
Michael Flynn used the Fifth Amendment, took the Fifth Amendment, pleaded the Fifth Amendment
earlier this week
with regard to some of the requests, the requests that were made of him by the Senate Intelligence Committee. Mm-hmm. How does that jive for the president with his statements earlier or last year over some of the people in Hillary Clinton's campaign or her State Department pleading the Fifth over some of the accusations against her?
Well, I think they're looking at two things right now. One is that there was an FBI dossier that was made public that was basically information that the Obama administration had been gathering on the Trump campaign, people in the Trump campaign. And the opposite side of this, they're basically weighing the pluses and minuses, because this is all going to be about the Logan Act, right? Acting as if you were in the capacity of some sort of State Department negotiator. And I think it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out.
So how did that answer my question? Donald Trump accused some of the people at Hillary Clinton's State Department of pleading the Fifth, therefore they must be guilty of something. Numerous of his tweets have haunted him over the past few days because of things that he tweeted about this person in Hillary's State Department pleading the Fifth. Michael Flynn does the same thing this week, and that does not seem to be an issue for Trump or for the people in his orbit that he pleaded the Fifth.
That was a very ugly campaign cycle, as you're aware, on both sides of the House.
I do know that.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is he didn't mean it back then?
No, I think a lot of it was rhetoric. You know, I mean, you're not necessarily, you are coming from the private sector. You're not necessarily involved in government at that point in time. I think it was cavalier, but I think it was an opportunity for him to throw those types of statements out. Now what he's looking at is, did someone who's in my court or who was in my court actually do something wrong? And I think they're taking this rather seriously.
And if he didn't do anything wrong, why would he plead the Fifth? What was the purpose of that?
I can't really tell you what's going through Mike Flynn's mind.
All right. Well, let's try something different. Well, something that we tried last week, and I think that you guys enjoyed it. So we're going to go to our rose-colored glasses segment. So as you remember, each of us... Yes, we want to go to our guests. So we do this thing called rose-colored glasses, where I bring a clip and Clay brings a clip. And then we both, it's almost like an ink block test. to say, here's what I take from it, and here's what Clay takes from it. And we want you guys to do that as well. So I brought my clip. Let's roll that first. So we got that queued up, and let's pray to God that we got audio.
By this torrent of leaks that seem to be coming from...
Very troubled. John McCain is right. Leakers should be prosecuted. The Justice Department should go after leakers. We have enough statutes to prosecute them. And this climate of partial leaking is even worse, because then there are selected quotes and you can make anything seem true.
So that's Jane Harman, and if you're not familiar with her, she is a Democratic Congresswoman, and for a long time, former, and for a long time she was a chief on the Intelligence Committee in the House. So she's got impeccable credentials. She's someone who understands intelligence, and so for her to say this is a big problem with leakers and that we need to go after them, I think that should be incorporated as we're talking about all this circumstantial evidence that's coming out against Trump, is that clearly people have an axe to grind here. And so I want to get your thoughts. If you can tell us, as a member, Jeffrey, with the FBI, why is there so much leaking happening, and what would be sort of the practice to make sure that this stops?
Well, my answer is not going to indicate in any way, shape, or form that, being a former member of the FBI, that the FBI is the source of the leak, and I just want to get that out.
Sure.
Especially after the problems in Manchester, where information was leaked. But the FBI would probably be the lead agency on investigating the leak. And, I agree with that statement that leaking little bits of information or leaking private conversation, it ruins the cooperation that is being formed between either the team or between investigators or whatever. And so it does need to be addressed, and especially when you're put in a position of authority and a position of trust, such as a member of the government, you shouldn't violate that trust. And when you do, you should be prosecuted.
I agree with that. I mean, I think we've got a gigantic problem and a gigantic challenge, and this goes all the way back to January. You had leaks coming out of the White House. You had Trump putting tests forward to kind of figure out what's going on. And if you look at where most of the Trump landing teams ended up, you've got a lot of infighting going on right now in between the old Obama administration folks and the new appointees and the new landing teams. And then you add to this the fact that a lot of the folks that we've been wanting to get into EU Parliament, to some of these additional roles, haven't really been vetted yet. And I've brought this up before. I think the biggest challenge that you're dealing with here is, one, how do we find these leaks? And two, how do we shore this up? Because this is hampering our counterterrorism efforts, and this is hampering our relations internationally.
Okay, well, so if we're doing rose-colored glasses, I guess my purpose here is to give my reaction to that video more than ask a question. I don't think that there are. I've watched the clip, and I don't disagree. I'm curious as to what she said after the clip cut off, because I feel like there's probably at some point, or should have been at some point, an extension that says these leaks are a huge issue that should be addressed and they should stop. However, they shouldn't distract from the fact that what's being leaked is important to investigate as well. And to me, the discussion about leaks is sort of the equivalent of saying, yeah, I did something wrong, but you should go get on him because he tattled. And the truth is, if there is something worth leaking, sorry, I don't think that's a good way to say it. If there's something that is substantive that is leaked, the fact that it was leaked is not necessarily a larger crime than the thing that was leaked in the first place. I don't know that there are many progressives who would say, oh, by all means, we don't need to worry about these leaks. They are an issue with national defense. They have hurt our relationships they came very close to hurting our relationship with the UK this week. But those are a issue that should be addressed. And so are some of the things that are being leaked to the press, things that need to be addressed. And I would also make the argument that if I were a person who was good at leading my group, leading my team, staffing my people, that I probably wouldn't have those types of issues, because I would have a little bit more control over my administration. I'm not saying that Donald Trump doesn't, but I do think that the argument that there are Obama people there who are clashing with the Trump people is in large part because the Trump people haven't replaced those Obama people. I mean, many of those Obama people...
They're not approved yet. A lot of them aren't approved yet. But
a lot of them haven't been appointed either. So there's a lot of stuff. There are a lot of things that could be done to fix this. Many of those leak issues need to be handled at the administrative level of those departments that may or may not be leaking them. I think Congress has a role in trying to help, investigate that as well. But there is an administrative issue also with the White House that could help change some of that as well. Do you disagree with that?
Well, I'd say there's one other issue that you should look at, and that's the speed of which information is coming out, right? So if you were to go back even 10 years, the speed at which some of this information came at you was slower. It was easier to classify this stuff. It was easier to make sure that's protected information that's not going to be shared. You're now looking at very rapid-fire pace, especially with Manchester. There were a couple of witch hunts that started on the internet. It's almost like some of the Reddit stuff that had happened after the Boston bombing, right? And so there's a lot of people running in a lot of different directions in the civilian world, in the information world, in the defense world. I think there's also problems there as well. And so it's, to your point, yeah, we definitely do need to prosecute and find who these leakers are and stop that process. And I think it definitely needs to be on the administrative level. But I think we're also looking at a state of the world right now where it is far more information in a much faster pace, and we're going to have to figure out new protocols how to deal with that.
So Pam Little on Facebook says, is the administration actively trying to determine who is leaking? Certainly President Trump has said, yes, we're going to go after them. We're going to go after them forcibly. Mickey, Alessa
But do we know that? But that's the question. They've said it, but there's a lot of stuff that he said that they haven't done. Do we know?
That's true.
Is there a task force that has been tasked with finding these leaks, or are we doing
I've not been asked to do it, so I don't know.
Well, so in practice, though, like you said, the FBI would be the ones investigating it. How would something like that happen in terms of, would we even know that they're being investigated?
And this kind of goes back to the Manchester problem. That information shouldn't be released. Everybody doesn't need that information. I've said previously, information that was released, the name of the bomber, the IED components, the general public doesn't need to see that. It means nothing to them. To the investigators, it means a great deal, because once they lose that element of surprise, they lose part of their investigative plan. And so if the FBI is looking into the leaking problem, the alleged leaking problem, hopefully they're not publishing that, hey, we're looking at these 12 people, because then it gives those 12 people a chance to clean up their act, destroy evidence, or do whatever they need to do. So it could be done and should be done quietly. That's the way most investigations are done. Quietly, nobody knows they're happening until until the FBI knocks on the door and brings you in.
And I would add to that, look back to San Bernardino and what happened there. You had protocols that were completely ignored, and you had reporters storming through the house of the alleged bomber, who they found out to be the actual bomber, picking up Social Security cards, running around with
after the search.
Yeah, it was after the search. But going through information that shouldn't be there. So we've got a necessity, I think, of the world at large to find out every single piece of information, and that makes the media voracious. On the opposite side of this, I think we've got to figure out better ways to securitize this information, because, like you're saying, none of this should have come out.
But this is you can't really do that necessarily. I mean, you almost admitted it, because the press isn't going to be restricted from finding these things out unless the security service, whoever that may be, keeps that information to themselves.
No, they went through the apartment, and that.
Right, but how did they find out who that person was?
Well,
are you saying that we?
That's not hard. Once 15 people show up, knock down a door, go through, or search in the house, everybody's going to know that. The only thing the law enforcement entity could have done at that point is really lock down the location, police tape it, nobody's allowed in. Anybody who goes past that police tape then is, stepped into a crime scene.
Because the alternative would be telling the press they can't do X, Y, or Z, and that would certainly meet with some constitutional opposition, would you not think?
Well, it's, look at Patriot 1 and Patriot 2, and the question we have to ask ourselves is, we have this fine line of balance in between necessarily needing to share all the information that we can in a timely fashion to all citizenry, and on the opposite side of this, making sure that we have enough security around what we're doing to ensure that we can prosecute these things and really stop additional secondary bombers if they're there, or if they're part of a cell, or in the case that they're part of some sort of communications network that's been operating on the internet.
How do you make the argument, though, that there's any role for the government to play in what the press can and cannot do?
I'm not necessarily making the role that they should be playing in what the press can and cannot do, but I think there's a timeliness of releasing this information, and that there's protocols for access. You know, with San Bernardino, they shouldn't have been running through the apartment. With what's going on in Manchester, look at the number of fake press informational items that were out there, including secondary threats at a hospital. A lot of this stuff, you know, it's kind of figuring out what, in this new day and age of terror, is going to be the balance in between the relationship between the press and government. And I don't think we figured that out yet.
Well, I want to talk, Jeffrey, just because you have so much experience with the FBI. So, you know, this came up during the 2016, or a couple years ago. PolitiFact, you know, put out this statement saying that Obama has used the Espionage Act more than any other president in the past. So this, you know, going after leakers is something that Obama certainly did as well, very aggressively, especially compared to the people before him.
Right.
Did you see that when you were at the FBI in terms of, do you think there was a culture of you know, making sure that we're stopping the leakers, and did you see that ramp up under Obama versus other administrations?
And I can't answer that because my specialty wasn't espionage or counterintelligence. I was a counterterrorism. So another department would have handled that, and because we compartmentalize our investigations, what I'm doing, not everybody in the FBI knew, and what other people are doing, I wouldn't know because I have no need to know.
How many of these leaks, though, that we've talked about recently have been leaks of information that would normally be classified FBI information? I mean, obviously the Manchester stuff this past week was security service information, but some of the stuff that we've heard has been, you know, the president said X, Y, or Z in the White House meeting with so-and-so, or, I mean, not all of it has been, not much of it has been leaks that would have come out of one of the security agencies, FBI or CIA, are they?
I don't think so, and I think with a lot of the leaks that are being talked about on the news now with what's being said within the White House, those are private conversations within that working group. And going back to a point made earlier, you have to have the freedom to say what you want and say what you think needs to be said when you're with a working group. Again, there are no such things as dumb ideas, although sometimes there are. You want to throw everything out, and whatever sticks on the wall, then you're going to start looking at. And if every time somebody says something, someone else is writing it down and releasing it, and it makes people look silly or look bad, you know, that's going to hurt the cooperation and cohesiveness of that team.
What would motivate someone to be a leaker? I mean, I don't imagine that anyone, certainly these leakers are not being paid. I don't know that for a fact, but I don't imagine that any of the news organizations are paying people to give them information. So what would be the motivation for someone to share information with the press?
Having been an FBI agent and taking my calling to heart, I don't know why anybody would violate that trust. Okay. Having said that, I'd imagine that there's some people with an axe to grind who want to push their political thought. But again, I'm just taking a stab. I don't have any firsthand knowledge.
Clay, do you want to show your clip?
Oh, this rose-colored glasses segment is
take your glasses out.
Barely
Take
a
mine off.
rose-colored glasses segment anymore. Yeah, let's give it a shot. What we got?
I encountered and am aware of information and intelligence that revealed contacts and interactions between Russian officials and U.S. persons involved in the Trump campaign that I was concerned about because of known Russian efforts to suborn such individuals. And it raised questions in my mind, again, whether or not the Russians were able to gain the cooperation of those individuals. I don't know whether or not such collusion, that's your term, such collusion existed. I don't know. But I know that there was a sufficient basis of information and intelligence that required further investigation by the Bureau to determine whether or not U.S. persons were actively conspiring, colluding with Russian officials.
So that was former CIA Director John Brennan, who was arguably the biggest fish to testify in front of one of these congressional committees investigating the relationship between the Trump campaign and Russia, if there was one. He was very precise in his wording, which I believed would lead me to believe as a viewer, and this is about how I took that clip, that he was exactly the opposite of what you suggested maybe someone would be. You know, John Brennan was not wording this in a way like he had an axe to grind. His statements were very carefully selected to not make accusations that weren't necessarily proven, but he did state that he had a personal concern about the relationship between the communication between the Trump campaign and Russia, and that he did believe, once again, that Russia brazenly tried to interfere with the election. That's sort of an issue that the Trump administration / campaign has yet to be willing to admit to, or at least accept that view that of the CIA, now the CIA former CIA director, all of the intelligence agencies, saying that there is a boatload, essentially, that's not the quote, of evidence saying that the Russians tried to interfere in this election. As an American who actually knows Donald Trump and tries in every way possible to give him the benefit of the doubt, I just don't understand why it would not be in the best interest of a president to say, yes, there was interference. I don't believe it changed the outcome, but there was interference and we need to stop this from happening. But they haven't done that, and there seems to be a very strong relationship between Trump and Russia now, steady on. Why?
Well, I think a lot of it is you're looking at different styles to start. So Obama had a style which was, let's continually update people on what's going on. And I think he had different relations with a lot of these intelligence agencies. I think with Trump, it's still defining those relationships with these intelligence agencies, and reports are coming out saying that Russia has meddled in about 34 different countries.
How is that an excuse for being okay with? I mean, the bottom line is, if there was information that said Iran was trying to meddle in U.S. elections, and we had evidence to show that Iran was meddling and trying to influence our election, I think most people would consider that an act of war. Certainly a president would consider that a country that we are not going to around with right now because you're messing with our stuff. Why is it that we're okay with Russia doing it? And
I don't think we're okay with it. I think what it is...
We're chumming up with them in the Oval Office.
There's a difference in between looking at Syria and the fact that we do not have a significant presence, more than about 7,500 troops on the ground, that Russia is actually actively fighting ISIS, and the need to securitize and solve the Syria situation. That's one thing. That's a lot of what they were talking about. The secondary aspect of this is, how do we manage those geopolitical relations with Russia, who has been an adversary ally for a long period of time? And thirdly, what exactly do we do from the fact-finding perspective? And I think that's what they're going through right now. It's not just the agencies that are going through this, but I think Trump and his campaign, you've worked with him, you know, he's someone who's going to want to find out exactly what is going on, and if there's something.
But he hasn't tried to do. Okay, it's a very good thing that Dr. Chopra was here today, because I'm very zen. When normally I would want to react to that response with, like, what the hell?
I think they're being methodical about this, and I think they're taking. And I think they're taking.
As someone who has worked with him, that is not a word I would ever use to describe Donald Trump. Your thoughts on the video?
I think, what that video showed was what you said, which was that there is no definitive proof, that he is acknowledging at this point it is just speculation, that there are some legitimate questions that need to be answered. I totally agree with that. But at the same time, we in this country, we operate on the principle that you are innocent until proven guilty. And I think that a lot of people in the media are not doing that. And so as Americans, I hope that we can embrace our heritage of being, open and understanding that people are innocent until proven guilty. So that testimony, I think it's just an indication that we need to keep going. Let's, turn every stone, make sure that we're getting to the bottom of this. But at the same time, don't have this mass hysteria where people are saying the presidency's over and, let's start talking to Orrin Hatch because everyone's going to be implicated, including the vice president and the House Speaker, which is a big theory going out right now with Louise Mensch.
I don't know. Nobody's listened to that. Well, you just brought more attention to it in the last 20 seconds than it ever has had before. But does it not concern you? And I want to bring you in, Jeffrey. But does it not concern anyone? I don't disagree with anything you said. Innocent until proven guilty, absolutely. But that there seems to be and again, this is just my belief, but I think it is the belief and the perception that a lot of people in this country are getting, that it's one thing to be innocent until proven guilty, and I'm all in agreement with that. And I think even Congresswoman Sewell said the same thing in that interview. I assume she said it today. We couldn't hear what she said. But it's a different thing when there seem to be active steps being taken by the person being investigated or by the group being investigated to stop the investigation from happening. He told the head of the NSA to try to put pressure on Comey not to investigate, to drop this Flynn thing. He told Comey, I hope you'll drop this Flynn thing. What does that tell you? And if I'm asking you to speculate more than you want to, then I apologize. But as a former FBI agent, when someone tries to tell you to tries to lead you away from the where you're trying to go, how does that make you feel? Does that give you pause?
I would say it gives you pause. First, I'd like to comment on the statement from Director Brennan, which I thought was excellent. He was very particular in what he said, and I think he tried to explain to the American people, I had concern, and so I did what I was supposed to do, and I turned it over to the FBI, who's responsible to do the investigation. And the FBI will do the investigation. And so I thought that was very good. He didn't sort of jump on the bandwagon of there's something there. He just said, I have a concern. And it probably happens much more often than the American public needs to know, because that's the way, the organizations work. But going back to the allegations and President Trump's asking the other two directors to besmirch the FBI's reputation and allegedly asking Director Comey to stop the investigation or to slow it down, that's not good. And the cover-up is possibly worse than the crime. And you have to understand that the FBI needs to remain an independent investigative arm of the government and not to be beholden to any one particular party or government in order to uphold the Constitution. And, to me, it was just, one of the dumbest things in the world to do, because the FBI, even when you take out the director, it's an organization that will continue on. It's a train that's not going to stop. And they will continue the investigation following the leads that are being developed by the evidence, which is one reason why they may be talking to Kirshner now. But again, that's where the information's taken them. They'll interview him, they'll talk to him, and if nothing more is to be found, they'll close that and they'll move on to the next.
I know we're going over, sorry, but is there a difference? I just want to know, is there a difference when we hear someone say the FBI's interested in, just educate me, is there a difference between hearing that and Director Mueller's investigation, or are they one and the same? Is Director Mueller essentially running an investigation within the FBI, or is that a completely separate thing?
I'm not 100% sure. I would assume that Director Mueller is going to take the FBI investigation and use that as the basis for their independent
But the
counsel.
FBI would then stop investigating because Director Mueller
I
would be
think
heading-
those people, and again, I'm not sure how they're going to work, but I think those people would be seconded to the Director Mueller, to continue the investigation. That's how I envision it.
It is a long process no matter
Yes.
what.
Yeah.
And it's also happening simultaneously on Capitol Hill, too.
Right.
So.
Separate investigations. The FBI, though, no political party affiliation. They're just beholden to the
And I would say
Constitution.
Although they are beholden technically to the Trump administration,
They're
because they fall
beholden.
under DOJ.
Try to fire
Yes.
him and see what happens.
Okay, but as an agent, you take an oath of office to the Constitution of the United States, not to a party. So,
And that's the reason why the director of the FBI has always
Been a
typically had a
10-year term.
10-year term, so that you're overlapping
Right.
administrations, of course, unless you get fired. But there's a lot going on, and I would argue honestly, and I'll never win another primary again anyway, so it doesn't matter. But
say never, Clark.
I would argue that the Senate's investigation right now, while it is run by political parties, has been impressively bipartisan, and this is it's run by a man who I voted against twice he's my senator from North Carolina, but I've had a lot of respect for the ways Richard Burr has handled it. Mark Warner from Virginia, the ranking Democrat on that committee. So regardless of what's going on, we're going to be hearing about it and talking about it for a long time to come, because these FBI investigations, these special prosecutor investigations, go on for years sometimes. Watergate went on for over 3 years, I think, before they actually did anything with it. So Jeffrey Ringel and Oz Sultan, thanks for being back.
Thank
Oz,
you.
thanks for joining us, Jeffrey. Thank you all for joining us today. We went a little bit over because we figured, we gave you about 5 minutes of silence there in the middle. We'd give you a little bit more at the end.
We're going to get the insight. Yeah, while you can actually hear us. And just pulling in a few commenters here. Mickey Alessi says, leaking a crime is bad, but committing a crime is even worse. Much, much worse. And Janet Marie Verselli says, I thank goodness for the leakers. They are the patriots exposing the crooks. So
it's a debatable point.
We'll keep going on. Come back, Mickey. We'll talk more about it. And Janet
is not over.
Nope. But I want to end with this comment from Patricia Subik. She said, and this is in relation to Deepak, who was our centering force this morning. We are living in uncertainty and bewilderment worldwide. How should we send positive thoughts and prayers to the people? Come back. We're going to do that every week here, as usual, on Bold TV, where we are tackling issues, but we're doing it positively.
Quite the segue, girl. Quite the segue into our closing. Join us 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning for Bold Business, and we'll be back here 10 o'clock next Friday. Have a great holiday weekend. We'll see you here next week. Thanks, guys.